Hello, my name's Chris Kemp. I work for Lewes Town Council, and my experience of the flood on that day was I was working at a place called Sussex Grange Furniture opposite Tesco's on the other side of the river. And in the morning I walked over Wiley's Bridge on the way to work, and I thought, well, it's quite high and running quite quickly. And being living in Lewes all my life, I didn't really think a great deal of it at the time.
My wife and I were lying in bed, and on the night before, and we just realised we were going to get got. And the rain was unlike anything. We'd had 3 days of hard rain, and we'd been sucking our teeth and looking at the river and thinking, And then that one night, it just was like nothing else. It was like just like being attacked.
We had friends round for dinner, and I remember it was raining. Well, obviously raining as it was raining lots. And I remember saying to the people that were there, could it rain any more? We're in the back room, and it was, it was just lashing. And I remember saying, God, could it rain any more? And it just kept raining, and it was just incredible. I remember thinking, that is amazing. I don't think I've ever seen such rain before.
When we got to work, just kept an eye on it over the river and just saw shoals of fish in clumps like that, all just going up, which was so unusual to see. And then you'd see wildlife climbing up the banks, mice and things like that, and you just thought, oh, well, maybe something is going to happen.
Anyway, I walked through town and got to Cliff Bridge, and I just asked, I said, what's going on? They said, well, haven't you heard? They think there's going to be a flood, a big flood. Where do you live? I said, Morris Road. And they said, well, you better get home now.
It was raining a lot, and it looked as if it was getting serious, so I took my camera and I went to where the water seemed to be getting deeper and deeper and deeper. And I met a friend on the way, and I said, I don't think it's going to reach Orchard Road. No.
On the day of the flood, we wandered up to the bridge with several other neighbours and kept looking to see whether we thought it was going to flood or not. And having been here for the first flood, I was getting asked quite a bit, what do you think? And with that, there seemed to be a large number of police appear in the town all of a sudden.
Around the time of the flood, I was running the John Harvey Tavern. I was at work and I was going to the bank, so put the takings all in the banking bag, went across the river, and the police wouldn't let me go across.
And then the water was rushing like a torrent on the playing field, and as I got back, it began suddenly to surge. So I hurried indoors and said to my husband, it's coming up the drive at a rate of knots. And he was on the phone telling a nephew, oh, it won't come up any further than the doorstep. So, and then he suddenly realised that the carpet was beginning to float.
Alan Dartnell, the chippy, was working out in the yard, and he says, come down to the brewery, come and have a look, there's always water flooding in. So me and Alan strolled down through the town to the Phoenix Causeway.
And I remember running down Cliff High Street, running down Morris Road, and if you know Morris Road, it's got a little bend in it, and I was right down the other end by the wall.
At that point, the water started to come over, so we all scuttled off home. The police tried to stop us coming into Cliff High Street again.
I was just looking out of my kitchen window, which is at the side, onto Talbot Terrace, and suddenly I looked and there was such a lot of people gathering. I couldn't understand what it was. I thought, oh, somebody, the Queen must be visiting or something. And then I went to have a look at the front door, and suddenly there was the Pells coming towards me.
So the only thing I could do was take the money back and put it back in the safe. Well, unfortunately, the safe was on the ground floor and the safe got flooded. So I put all the change in one of the big restaurant colanders and washed it. It was disgusting. And with the notes, they were all soggy, so I had to put them on the restaurant tables. I laid them out on all the restaurant tables, put the heating on full, and then I had to babysit them till they were dry because I couldn't leave the money on its own.
We said, well, we live here and we've haven't locked up or done anything, so we need to get back, which we did. And within half an hour, the water was in the garden and starting to fill up rapidly.
And we stand there having a good laugh with lots of people at the rubber dinghies floundering around as all the barrels are sloshing about all over the bridges, and the two of us walked back to Pinwell Lane, long way away, and half an hour later, yikes, the bloody brown stuff is coming in through the doors. We can't believe it, because, I don't know, we were on another level.
Just beforehand, Mick walked across the yard outside, because it's an old dairy, there's the brick yard outside, patio I suppose, and Mick walked across and it was like pieces of a jigsaw that weren't flattened. The bricks were like that and they moved as Mick walked on them, and I really didn't like that at all. I thought, this is scary.
We got most of the stuff out of our downstairs room, but the piano was in a violent, it was in a dangerous position. So I summoned 3 guys from outside, one of whom was rather reticent, because it turned out it was Hamish. I didn't know who he was. And so I ordered him to lift up my piano.
Actually, it started very early in St Pancras Gardens. At 6 o'clock in the morning, we noticed that the St Pancras stores was being flooded, and all the water came down from the Winterbourne area.
Near our house is the Winterbourne stream, and I think that flooded before the Lewes did. We woke up that morning to see businessmen in their suits trying to get to their cars and rolling up their suit trouser bottoms and taking their shoes off and picking with their briefcases across the road to try to get to their car, determined to get to work despite of all the chaos going on around them.
And because the water from the Winterbourne had broken through a wall into the recreation ground and had come round. And so later on, the people from the shop, the Patels and other helpers, actually broke the wall of the Winterbourne in order to let the water back into the river.
Having done this, I took it to the bank and it was about that fat. And I had to say to the lady, I can't even put it under the counter because it's that fat.
As it got worse during the course of the morning, the flood was coming over the walls, and the vicar from Southover Church suddenly appeared with a sledgehammer. And this figure in dog collar was swinging the sledgehammer to break the brickwork around the walls to release the pressure of the water. And just remember this image of this figure in his dog collar and black shirt swinging the sledgehammer, trying to do something to relieve the flood. It was positively biblical. It was fantastic.
And suddenly, from the back in the kitchen, the water came down from the railway as well. It came rushing down Talbot Terrace, made a great pool at the junction, and came into my kitchen.
And then someone shouted, maybe Mick shouted it was coming in at the back, and it came up through the toilet, ground floor, and our ground floor is quite big, so then it was like the whole place is beginning to fill up with water.
You suddenly go into a different mode of thought and you think, what's most valuable here?
And there was a lot of stuff that we thought was far enough off the ground, and it certainly wasn't.
I never realised I'd painted out so many stupid pictures.
At that time, my daughter, who was 15, approached me and said, could she go out around town with a camera taking photos? And I hadn't seen her then for 5 hours after that.
And then rapidly seeing that level won't do, moving them higher, moving them higher.
Then Stuart Morris came to say, bad luck, you're about to flood. We went up on the roof and we opened a bottle of champagne and we just watched it come in.
I'm Beverly Thompson, and 10 years ago I was a reporter for BBC South, and I remember getting a call. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I went along to Orchard Road, and when I arrived I couldn't believe what I was looking at, because I was just looking down a road and it was just water. So there was a lifeboat there. We climbed onto the lifeboat, me and my cameraman, went down the road, spoke to people who were leaning out of their windows, their top windows, with their animals and their children, went further down the road, and at the bottom of the road there's something I'll never ever forget. There was an ambulance there, probably about that far from the top, so about a foot from the top of the ambulance. The light was still going.
We've managed to get onto one of the housing estates in Lewes, courtesy of the lifeboat who've come up from Shoreham. As you can see, some of these houses are 10 foot underwater, and we haven't even reached high tide yet. There are some estimates that 3 or even 4 feet of water could be on its way.
At the moment is about 3 inches from the top step. There's 3 inches in the living room, so we're hoping now that it doesn't get any higher.
In schools and community centres, people and their pets bedded down for the night, dreading the morning and what awaited them at home.
It was just the most surreal situation, an incredible day.
This is the River Ouse. Normally it flows quietly through the centre of the oldest part of Lewes. Tonight it's a raging torrent which has submerged that part of the town.
Today has been dramatically different. The helicopter has flown 3 times to the flood-hit area, a total of more than 220 miles.
The flooding will certainly get worse overnight. With high tide expected in the next 2 hours, that'll bring the water level up even further.
Now, Juliet, what's the scene there tonight?
Well, not surprisingly, the people of Lewes are still very apprehensive. As you can probably see behind me, the water is now into the town centre itself. Police say it's not safe to go any further than the point where we are right now.
As we approach high tide here at Lewes, those who've dared to stay in their houses are on the upper floors waiting to see what the tide and further floodwater will bring. It's already been a day that no one will forget, with the worst flooding in East Sussex for more than 40 years.
Downstream in Lewes, the situation has been deteriorating throughout the day as high tides met floodwater with nowhere to go. Well over 300 homes have now been evacuated, and tonight the flood is still rising.
But I suppose the good news is that they have been able to get to more than 100 people who were trapped in their homes. They've been taken to safety and are now at one of 2 emergency centres where they're being cared for.
By this time we'd sent the children off through the back garden to get away from the river. But of course the water was coming from the other direction. We hadn't quite realised that at that point. We sent them off into really quite fast-moving torrential water, and they went to another house for safety, but I think by the time they got to that house it had flooded, or it flooded very soon afterwards, and then they had to move somewhere else. We didn't know where they'd gone at that point.
On the day of the flood, I went down to my ex-husband's house and to help him move some of the stuff out, try and save some of it at least, what we could. And while we were doing that, within about half hour or so, Steve came in to help us out.
Then the funny bit, we lifted the wardrobe up in the front room and put it on her foot, and she was not amused.
I didn't swear.
But yes, it was. But 3 days later, was it 3 days later?
Yeah, 3 to 4 days later.
I asked Sally out, and we've been together ever since.
And we got married about 4 years ago.
Mm.
So
I told the police officers in the evening that my daughter was missing, and they said, you have a choice. Either we call out the people with the helicopters, or you just go and look for her yourself. And I thought they had so much fuss going on that I'd actually look for her myself, and she was at home safe and sound.
We were carrying things up and downstairs, and it was getting very cold in the water. And then our daughter came down the stairs with a bag, and she was 17 at the time, and she said, I'm leaving home now. I'm going to live at Rowan's, and I'll come back when it's back to normal. So she left home that night.
So we waded up the high street, along Cliff, up as far as Bill's, and we met a policeman. And the policeman said, you can't go any further, it's too dangerous. But we said, we have actually got a business here. And suddenly my feet just went from under me. And I found myself 7.5 months pregnant down a manhole. It was like hanging in nothingness. So I actually put my arms on the side of the manhole, levered my very pregnant self.
Where was the water?
The water on me. Well, I was in the manhole up to here. And so the water, I could feel water all around me. And when I actually managed to get out, I was wet up to here. So I pulled myself out of the manhole, shook myself down. But as you can see, I think the product of the flood was none the least damaged. So yeah, that's my abiding memory of the flood.
Norman Baker, MP for Lewes. I remember the floods of 2000 very well, not least as a resident of Lewes, coming out my house in the high street, walking down and seeing the water, literally seeing the water rise at Cliff Bridge, seeing the devastation the next day when people's possessions were out on the street and the pavement, seeing the devastation in Spencer's Lane when people's bedrooms as well as their lower ground floors were flooded. But also seeing the community spirit when people pulled together, worked together for each other, helped each other out, and showed that Lewes responded well to a pretty devastating effect.
And I just went, oh shit.
And my immediate thought was that my car's not insured, I've got to get it out of the street. And the police were chasing me, saying, you've got to get out of your house, you can't salvage your car. And I said, no, I've got to get my car out of here. And the water was already, I don't know what that is, a foot and a half deep. So I got in my car and they were banging on the window saying, no, you've got to go, get your belongings. And I said, no. And I drove off in this really dramatic fashion up Morris Road with this weight, water weight behind me, and drove it up onto, in fact, Needlemaker's car park.
The wall went that was holding the water back near the river, and the water just come straight through our unit, and the furniture was going out the door as we were as well. It's quite surreal, really. You didn't think anything dangerous of it or anything.
The water got a bit deeper and deeper, and when it was waist deep, we decided that it was time to go, and I went up the Twitten with Pat and stayed for a week with her in her house.
And there was a big Arctic lorry picking up all the furniture that we had ready to go to America, and we just got one card table on the back, and the chap who was driving the lorry decided that he was going to leave, and he went off with a card table. We never saw that again. I think a little present for him, maybe.
I was marooned in the flat for 4 or 5 days.
This is the last time around, you're right. Okay.
My name's Dave Adamson. I'm one of the Brighton lifeboat crew that was involved in the Lewes Floods. My day started in actual fact rescuing my partner, who was stranded in floods when she was on her way to school, and that was around 9 o'clock, I think, and sorted her out, came back. Next thing I knew, I'd got a phone call from the Brighton station asking me to go to Gold Control.
Where was Gold Control?
Gold Control was the Lewes Police headquarters. So I turned up there, hive of activity, people running around doing everything, and the first job I had to do was to recce, basically get some information on what the situation was. Riverside Lodge, I remember wading through the water there and seeing all the cars semi-submerged, some of the wipers going with electrical shorting.
I was in bed with a TENS machine with a prolapse disc, and the next thing I had was a helicopter. So I went out to explore, and I saw our local farmers, Justin and Sue Harmer, being raised from a helicopter in the air. Neighbours had called them saying that the cows were sort of marooned and near water and it's looking at getting worse.
At one point I got swept off my feet, which was quite interesting because you're inching along through the water, which was probably up to at least your chest. And swept off my feet, drifted in the water, was quite comfortable about that, didn't really worry too much about that. But when I realised there was a pole coming up, I grabbed the pole, but it was alive with electricity, so I got a bit of a tingle. Let go of that, found my feet, carried on, because most of the time it was either using the engines where you could, or actually hauling the lifeboats through areas because the engines couldn't be used because of submerged issues, which we were concerned about. So there's a lot of slogging basically going through.
As soon as we launched, we virtually had a capsize. The boat was completely swamped, and we ended up actually inside a shop.
I was Lord Lieutenant at that time. I had only just been appointed, and I knew the county quite well, and I was certainly a great admirer of everything to do with Lewes.
An old lady we rescued from her upstairs room, and she carried this little bundle in a towel, big towel, and she was very careful about this and said, "Will you look after this?" And we said, what's in it? And she said, "It's a tortoise." And the joke came up, "Does it swim?" You know?
And I was telephoned to say that there had been these terrible floods, and was there anything I could do? Well, clearly I couldn't do anything which was actually coming to bail out the water or anything, but I did think maybe, as this was really a tremendous potential tragedy of an enormous size, I might be able to ask the Queen if she could perhaps send a message of encouragement, which indeed she did, and also asked Prince Edward to come down, and there's a very good photograph of him on your walls as he's walking along.
These residents, their pet dog and cat, were brought to land across what is usually a bustling high street.
How do you feel to have them, two of them back?
Delighted, but I would like the other two as well. We've got the boys, but we haven't got the girls.
Quite strong. Well, I'd like to tell you about a dream I had 2 days before. I had just bought some new furniture, brand new furniture, beautiful big red Habitat sofa, and I'd never owned such a thing myself. And I remember thinking, oh, I haven't got any contents insurance because I just recently moved and I hadn't sorted it out. I better do that. And in the dream it was really quiet and really still, but Morris Road was full of water, and there was water, the water was going down there, and in the water was my red sofa, and it was floating really calmly and really slowly down towards Chandler's. And that was it. The dream, it was an image rather than a dream. It was just really slow, really vivid, and it was just moving around.
Hearing stories about other crews and what was happening. I remember the story coming through of the lifeboat crew that had to scramble up the cliff bridge there, and there's some amazing photographs I remember seeing in some of the booklets that were produced afterwards of that crew. Luckily, again, no one was lost. I think their lifeboat washed up somewhere around New Haven.
Some blokes arrived and said they were from the insurance company and they'd been instructed to come and clean the house out. The same day the man from the insurance company came and he said, I don't know anything about this, off you go. And he said, we'll pay them a day's money, but they must clear off. They'd come down from the north and were knocking on doors saying that the insurance company had sent them, and then they left bills.
The house had to be stripped. The insurance people insisted that everything was taken away and thrown away and renewed, which took 6 months.
All of Anne's artwork, after 40 years career in art teaching and display and design, was absolutely ruined. When the insurance man came around, he said, don't worry, we can get you another folder.
Rented another house at the insurance expense in Paddock Road, which was quite interesting and enjoyable. So it wasn't a total disaster. My photographs all got ruined, so I spent ages trying to rescue them.
The building work started and the insurance people were incredible. We had great help from them and they were in shock, the assessors. Young lad came round and he was just in a shirt, he didn't have a jacket and he was cold, and he'd been with very distressed and depressed people, and when we said, would you like a cup of tea, sit down by the fire, you know, and he couldn't believe it. He stayed for hours because he just needed sustenance and reassurance because he was young and he'd never seen a flood like that, and he'd never been with so many people who were upset.
And then I was feeling sorry for myself. I went down to Cliff and I saw 2 skips each side of the road, from Florian's shop and from military bookshop. I thought that was one of the saddest moments because nobody died, but books are valuable and lovable, and they're all absolutely ruined.
I was away at university. I think it was my first year at university, and I arrived at Lewes station and walked back, took my usual route home, and it was like slightly post-apocalyptic. I think it was quite late, it was about 11:30, and I was walking through the streets and everywhere was boarded up, and there was kind of mud 6 foot high on all the buildings, and I couldn't work out what had happened. So obviously I was anxious to get home, and when I did get home, there was about 30 neighbours squeezed into my house. My bedroom was like a refugee centre basically. Everyone was having a good time, but it was odd. It was an odd experience. No one actually phoned me, you know. I'd quite like to have been there and seen the carnage, you know. Would have been interesting though, because it was an interesting thing that happened. Yeah, and I missed out. You know.
I will never walk past that river again. I can't cross the river without checking it. It sounds silly. I think you'll do it for the rest of your life. You remember what it can do. You can't hold the tide back. You know, if it's going to do it, it's going to do it. But yeah, I won't trust. It's a beautiful thing, the river, but I won't trust it.
Flood by M.G. Neal. Cambered river on its haunches hackles up, bides time, hunched and menacing, slunk down with the dawn, silent, currents tourniquet, tail flicks, ready to pounce. Slowly rising, nocturnally, sleek with moonshine, when you think you're safe in bed, listen to the panther, slick as oil, seep, algae spored, into the hallway carpet, purring under the front door, slinking through gaps, lapping at the banister.
Yeah, one has to decide whether they're going to live with it and perhaps the possibility of it happening again. And I've decided that perhaps I'll stay put and see what happens. I might miss the next one.